再長談，我哋翻嚟繼續講我哋嘅國會改革。今日請到嘅來賓咧係我哋卑詩大學民主政制研究所所長 Dr. Max Cameron。Well, you earlier in the first part of the program, you ended by saying that unless they come up with a brilliant idea to get all the support of all the parties, what is your idea of a brilliant system?
Well, there are many ideas. So one possibility is what's referred to as the alternative vote. So the way this works is that now when you go into the polling station, you have a ballot and you have a list of names that are connected to parties, and you cross an X by the candidate and the political party that you want. Another system would be you actually get to rank them. So instead of just putting one X, you'd put my first choice is one candidate, my second choice is the next, and my third is the other. That's called the alternative vote. It has some significant advantages, but it is not a more proportional system. It wouldn't necessarily address the problem that we have a disparity between the percentage of voters behind a party and the number of seats they get. So I don't think that's a great solution. There are people who like that idea. It does have some advantages. There are certain segments of the Liberal Party that like it in particular. Another possibility would be that you would have a ballot in which you would vote for the candidate that you like the most, and you might even rank those, but you would also have a vote for the party. So you would split your vote into two parts, one for the candidate, one for the party. And then what that allows us to do is if the candidate gets enough votes, the candidate is elected, but we also look at the percentage of votes that go to the parties. And if one party is not fully represented, if that is to say, if the number of candidates who get elected isn't as high as the percentage of the vote for their party, then we have what are called top-up MPs, extra MPs that would be added to their caucus to ensure that the outcome is more or less proportional. That's referred to as a mixed member proportional system. Another possibility is the single transferable vote. And that was the system that was actually recommended by the BC Citizens Assembly.
And that is a system that nobody knows what's going on.
Well, again, it's in terms of what you do as a voter, it's not that complicated. It's a system in which you have, again, you would have multi-member ridings. So you would have larger ridings than we currently have, and there would be a number of members. You would have a choice of candidates, and you could rank them. And then what happens is the candidate who wins more than the threshold required to be elected as a member of parliament, those surplus votes are redistributed among the other candidates until you get enough representatives to fill all of the quotas. It's complicated only in the sense that making those calculations requires a little bit of math. It's not actually complicated at all for the voter. What I like to say is, I drive a car that's full of computer chips. I don't know how they operate, but the car works pretty well. I don't necessarily prefer a car that I can understand how it works and doesn't have any computer chips is not necessarily going to be a better car. So I guess the way in which the system works may be a little bit more complicated, but actually for voters, it's not too hard to figure out.
Now, there is always an old debate over efficiency and effectiveness.
Yeah.
Now, what we have before is different parties come up with different ideas, or different candidates come up with different ideas, and we choose whoever likes this idea, and you're responsible for that.
Right.
We chose you, and you get to do what you want. If we don't like it, next time.
Yes.
But at least they have the chance to be efficient, to finish an idea or to keep on with one principle.
Right.
But what we are doing now is something more of a proportional representation.
Right.
But proportional representation is not choosing someone to do something to give them the chance to do something that they have a clear objective or clear plan. But rather that the government is representing all the different ideas that has been. So what happens in the society debate goes right into the government, and that means what we know is that the proportional representation, government equals to unstable minority government.
Yeah.
Is that a fair way to describe this, and is it good for our country?
Well, I think it's fair to ask the question about stability. And I think stability can mean different kinds of things. So I agree with you entirely that our current system has the virtue of a sort of a sense of accountability. You know, you vote for a political party, that party forms the government for the most part, because one of the things our current system does is it manufactures majorities. It creates what I've referred to as false majority governments. That is, we tend to have more majority governments than we have elections in which the majority actually supports one political party. So you could say that there's a virtue in that in terms of governance. Although one of the concerns that I have is that this also leads to a fair amount of policy change over time. You can get a party that has a majority that carries out its agenda, it's removed in the next election, and you get a party that wants a whole other agenda. And when we've got important policy issues that require long time frames, that kind of shift in policies can be a problem. One of the advantages of proportional representation is that you get the formation of coalitions. You're unlikely to have a single party forming a majority. And so what happens is governments are formed by coalitions within Parliament. It's true that when you have coalitions, there are coalition dynamics and it can look unstable. And certainly it can take time to put together coalitions, and coalitions can fall apart. And there are problems with how coalitions work, and there are countries where they haven't worked well. But actually, if you look around the world, in a lot of places, there are coalitions that work very well, and they can be very stable over long periods of time. And one of the advantages that they have is they tend to form around consensus on certain core values, principles, and policies. And so those policies tend to get implemented. And I would give an example of that. The German system, where you have grand coalitions that have endured for many years, coalitions that have included the Green Party, and that's one of the reasons why the Germans have made such significant progress in terms of getting out of fossil fuels and finding ways of generating more renewable energy and changing their whole infrastructure. So that, I think, is a reflection of a kind of a political system that, yes, it involves coalitions, and the lines of accountability can be a little bit more complicated, but it actually can result in fairly stable policymaking over time.
Thank you. You at least show me from a different perspective on how to define stability.
Right.
Well, now, it is not only about among the academic or the people in the committee, but in fact, the voters. Everyone in this country needs to have a consensus and understanding of this big, huge change. So the final question that I have for you is referendum or no referendum. I know the Conservative Party now is pushing for a referendum. And so what is your take on a referendum? It takes a lot of time, and it would take a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, I would say in the first instance that I agree with the general proposition that this is an important change, and so an important change like this shouldn't be done unless it commands real democratic legitimacy, and that means broad support. People understand the system, they're comfortable with the change, they're willing to move ahead with it. There are a number of ways of getting there. One way would be a citizens' assembly. The government chose not to go that route. It chose to go the route of town hall meetings and to come up with, to support the committee, a parliamentary committee, an all-party committee, which, by the way, the Liberals, I think, accepted the NDP proposal to not make that a committee that reflected the distribution of seats in Parliament, but rather something closer to the distribution of votes in the country. And that's a good thing, because it means that this committee will have to reach a consensus, at least among 2 or 3 political parties, to come up with a proposal. If it can do that, and it's a good proposal, do you need a referendum? I would say not necessarily. There would be circumstances under which a referendum might be a good idea. We have cases where, like New Zealand, where referenda were used, first to ask people whether they want to change, then to get their support for a particular political system. It could be that would be the route we would go. We might have a referendum after we change the system to see whether people like it and want to return to it. But I think a really critical point here is it is simply not the case that a referendum is mandatory, for a number of reasons. First of all, this is not a constitutional change. This is a change in statutory law. Secondly, referenda aren't part of our Constitution anyway. We've kind of gotten into the idea in Canada, because of the referenda around Meech Lake and Charlottetown, that we think any major change that seems to affect our Constitution needs to pass through a referendum. And that's just not true. And the final point I'd make is referenda are problematic because they have a very strong bias toward the status quo. If people look at 2 things, a proposal that's a little bit abstract that they don't really understand, and the current system that they know, they're almost invariably going to say no. And we saw that, I mean, in BC, we actually got a lot of support for SDV, but the threshold was set too high. I think that was a political mistake. They should have set the threshold at just at 50%. But even so, in the second referendum, it failed. In Ontario, the referenda failed as well. You could draw many lessons from that, but one of the things we know about referenda is they do tend to favor the status quo. People are reluctant to embrace change. And so I think one has to be a little bit careful. This could be the way out for the Liberal Party of not pursuing change, is to say, well, you know, we've got a proposal, we're not sure how broad the support is, so let's put it to a referendum. That could kill it, and it could be another generation before we come around to talking about these issues again.
Mm-hmm. So the last question. We are almost at the end of our program. But the real issues that surrounded our political system, I think the way we vote is one issue.
Yeah.
But what affects the result of all our of any election is actually the voting rate,
right?
Presentation over contents.
Yeah.
And the omnipotent power of the MP offices. Yeah. Do you think by fixing those through statutory law, which is much simpler, can help our system without going through this major change in electoral the system?
That's a great point. I mean, I think in general, we have a good democracy. In some ways, it's an exemplary democracy. It could be better, and there are lots of things that we could do to improve it. Not all of them require something as complicated as electoral reform. There are all kinds of things that we could do to enhance the functioning of our democracy, which could be done by any government that had the political will, some of which I think the current government is in fact doing. So return to cabinet government, reduce the power of the prime minister and party leaders, give more autonomy to ordinary members of parliament, give them more opportunities to have free votes. Electoral reform will probably be a free vote. More opportunity for private members' bills. Bring back parliament. Make sure that Parliament becomes not just a rubber stamp with big omnibus legislation passed that nobody actually reads, but actually make it a genuine space for deliberation and connect it to other spaces of deliberation in our society. Enhance the democraticness of our political parties, engage voters using innovative ways of encouraging people to participate in politics, including citizens' assemblies and other kinds of participatory innovations. All of these things we could do right now. We don't need a referendum on them. We don't need even to change legislation. A lot of these things these are practices of politics. And that's one of the reasons why we have our Summer Institute for Future Legislators at UBC, where we try to encourage people to think about what the role of the legislator is. And we've been very grateful to have you come and join us for those sessions.
So even if there's a referendum and the referendum lose, we still have the confidence that there are things that we can do to fix the system which will come to the same result.
Yes, I worry a little bit that a lot of people have put their heart into the campaign for electoral reform, and if it doesn't happen, there will be a great sense of disappointment. This is not the be-all and end-all of our democracy. There are a lot of other things that we can do to enhance our democracy, even if this doesn't work.
I won't lose the confidence, and I won't lose it. We'll continue to fight for a better system with better results. 周日長談今日傾到嚟呢處，我哋下一次再見。我係 BC Lee 黎伯佳。